We'll wait a few minutes for everybody to have a chance to take their seat. Rendben, akkor elmondom először magyarul.
I will mention in Hungarian first. I am Zsolt Kellner. I will be moderating this evening, and beginning from now I will speak in English because probably it is more polite for our guests.
That's the biggest independent online newspaper in Hungary. I will be the moderator of this panel. This panel will be in English. I will tell you a few things about before we start. So we'll have a short video message from the leader of the Socialists and Democrats, Irache Garcia Perez. And after that, we'll have 2 short speeches, and then we'll have a panel. At the end, you'll probably have a chance to ask a few questions. We'll see how we are doing with time. But if everybody is all right, then we can, I think, start with the video message. Elkezdhetjük a videót.
Queridos compañeros, queridos camaradas húngaros, como presidenta del Grupo de Socialistas y Demócratas en el Parlamento Europeo quiero mandaros un mensaje de apoyo y esperanza, porque el cambio es posible. Un futuro donde primen los derechos y la democracia. La democracia da voz a todos los grupos de la sociedad, mujeres, hombres, jóvenes y mayores, personas de diferentes orígenes, culturas y la comunidad LGTBI+. Democracy belongs to everyone. Por eso el concepto de democracia antiliberal, desarrollado a lo largo de los últimos años por Orbán, es sencillamente monstruoso. Si la democracia se censura, si solo representa los intereses de unos pocos, entonces no es democracia. El Grupo de Socialistas y Demócratas está preocupado porque estamos viendo retrocesos democráticos y del Estado de Derecho en muchos países y, por desgracia, Hungría lleva años liderando esta tendencia. Pero también me alegra estar hoy aquí porque las cosas están cambiando. Fuimos los primeros en ver los trucos de Orbán. Aquí, en el Parlamento Europeo, nos hemos hecho oír en los informes anuales sobre el Estado de Derecho y cada año son más completos y específicos. En este Parlamento hemos sido insistentes a la hora de expresar nuestra desaprobación y denunciar cada retroceso. Tras años de lucha por recuperar la libertad de expresión, la libertad de independencia de los medios de comunicación, la independencia judicial, otros ven a través de los trucos de Orbán. Como saben, Orbán acudió al Parlamento Europeo este mes y recibió una ducha fría de los grupos políticos proeuropeos. Ahora todos vemos a través de sus trucos y no los toleramos más. We have been fighting together all these years. I can imagine how tiring it must be for you to face an increasingly autocratic regime year after year, a clientelist regime that only rewards friends and shut out everyone else. But don't give up now because times are changing. We will keep facing the most right-wing European Parliament ever. Con fuerza, con compromiso, un saludo socialista.
Thank you, and I would like to ask Gabi Bischoff, member of the European Parliament and the Vice President of the Socialists and Democrats, to say a few words to the audience.
Thank you very much, and I'm very grateful for the invitation to be here with you and to discuss with you what we achieved in the last years and what we are going to achieve in the near future. And I have to say, I'm also happy to be here with Clara and with other former colleagues here of the European Parliament, because we are one family. We are in this together, and we are working together for a stronger Europe, a fairer Europe, a more social Europe. And I was especially happy to be invited to this conference just days after the anniversary of the 1956 uprising. And I think the courage, the suffering, but especially also the hope of these men and women that had lost their lives 1956 will always stay in our European memory, and it will always be a driver, this hope, for what we are going to achieve in the future. And our presence here today is also to emphasize this and to say Yes, here we will be stronger together in these fights that are coming up, also in the next parliamentary term. And I will be very honest, it will be tough 5 years. We will be facing in a parliament where the conservative group grew stronger, where we have two new political groups on the right-wing extremist fascist side, and an EPP that does not shy away to ally with them. And we have to work very hard that the democratic pro-European forces will be also united and strong enough to make sure a stronger Europe, a prosperous Europe, will be only achieved if we work on compromises with the pro-European democratic forces in Europe. And I have to say, it's very clear that Orban and his Fidesz are not part of that. And if we look back on the last 5 years together, we can be quite proud. And when I see Maria Rodriguez, I'm very happy to emphasize again that we, the Socialists and Democrats, we were the driving force to establish a European pillar of social rights so that this promise of a social Europe doesn't stay a promise, but that we have a lot of legal initiatives that made sure that people, for example, in a world with rising prices and rising inequality, will have better wages. And we are looking forward also to see how Hungary will implement, for example, the minimum wage directive, with better wages, but also, and here I look at my colleagues from the trade unions, stronger collective bargaining in Europe. And this is what we achieved together here. The colleagues from Hungary, from all 27 member states in our political group, together with the commissioner from our family, Nicolas Schmidt, and it shows that if we unite, if we have clear goals, we can be very successful in Europe. But I also have to say we are facing huge transitions, and a lot of people, a lot of workers in Europe are afraid of the future. And here we have to reconnect it with the hope that we also had in our brothers and sisters in the citizens of 1956. The hope, really, that we can manage these transitions in a fair and just way, that we will involve workers in these changes, and that we will make sure that when we lose jobs, that the new jobs that are coming up will be also good jobs, and that people will be qualified, will be supported so that they can develop and prosper in these jobs. Being in Hungary, I also, on my way here, I thought about the development in Hungary and about the new Nobel Prize winners in economy. And their study that showed that stable institutions where people have trust in are drivers for prosperity, and that functioning democracy is essential if you want to have prosperity for all. And this is why, for me, Europe is really a project of hope. It's a project of values, but it's also a project where former enemies join together like we do, member states, citizens, parliamentarians. We work together because we know that we will only have peace, prosperity, and security in a united and strong Europe, because we are facing the global challenges much better together than alone. And in this sense, I'm very happy to discuss with you all what we achieved. I think we can be proud of, and we will have tougher times, so we have to fight even tougher to achieve, for example, that we need a fairer mobility in Europe, that we also need really to continue to shape these just transitions for more democracy at work, and also prosperity for all in these times. And in this sense, let's use this time together to exchange, but I also maybe define some new projects of hope for the next 5 years. In solidarity and in a fighting spirit, to come together here in Budapest and at the right time when we are now starting the new term, that we can take back your ideas, your hopes, and your comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And I would like to ask Klára Dobrev now, MEP and head of the Hungarian delegation to the S&D group, to say a few words. I believe she will speak in Hungarian.
Yes, in Hungarian. So raise the hands who needs a translator. Headphone? Who needs headphones? Jó napot kívánok!
Good evening. Let me wait a couple of minutes because our beautiful Hungarian language is a little bit difficult, so you will need interpretation. I hope you can hear and understand what I'm saying. Thank you very much. Interpretation is going on. Great. So I am very grateful to my friends throughout Europe for having come here to Budapest and sitting here and listening to this discussion together with us. I'm happy for that because it's not easy to be a socialist, a social democrat, to be a left-oriented politician. What we see all over Europe is that the right-wing populism is gaining ground. In many countries they are already in government. The right-wing populist vocabulary is pouring from everywhere, and this is extremely and especially difficult for us Hungarians. Leftism, social democracy, is considered as something ancient. What can you do in a situation like that? I hear the voices, and not few at all, who say, don't be that loud. There's no need to be such a loud social democratic person. Don't talk so much about fair tax system. It's much more cool to say, let's keep the old lump sum tax. Don't talk about progressive taxation. Don't talk about housing problems. Don't talk about individual right to housing, because it's much more cool to spend money on chateaus and villas. Let's not talk about the sacred cows of the right, the churches and their political role. Let's not talk about pedophilia, because these are not right themes, and right themes are the ones that are cool today. Let's not talk so much about strong Europe. I call it Europeans, United States, others call it a social Europe, but we talk about the same, an ever stronger Europe that is capable of protecting the citizens. Let's not talk about that, because those talking about the sovereign nation states and hide themselves about this lie, try to do politics, are much louder than us. And let's not be so loud in protecting and supporting the Ukraine, because it seems that those who are tactically swallowing this issue are stronger. Would that be the right path? Would that be, my friends on the left, dear social democratic friends, would that be the solution to the problems? What should we do if those influencing the public say, don't be that left-oriented? What should we do when this is what's pouring over us from online media, from the press, sometimes from independent press as well, from the policy makers, the opinion makers? We do not need the left and liberal values, because they're not in. The ones who are loud today follow and believe in other trends. But if you go to the street and start to talk to people, then you will see that everything, all what we think about the world, has a majority in the country. If you talk to people, they say yes, they want a government, politicians, a political force that is capable of fighting for fair jobs, fair and safe working conditions, fair wages, for institutions like unions who protect workers against their
bosses. Oh God, that's a social democratic idea. But if you go to the streets, what we will say is that people want a fair and just tax system that is unbearable, that a couple of people, a handful of people become billionaires and the other are in poverty. The ones having billions should pay more taxes. Oh God, this is a left idea. If you go to the street, what will hear is that people demand and want social services that everyone is eligible for, be it the elderly care, be it housing, and that's a left-oriented idea as well. And luckily, and for God, in spite of the decades of propaganda campaign of Orbán, the overwhelming majority of the Hungarians say yes, they want to live in a European Hungary, in a strong Europe, and they want to be Hungarians. Yes, this policy of a strong Europe is something that is represented by the left today in Hungary. It is only the left parties that stand up for these things without compromises. The three right-wing parties have always identified and positioned themselves against us, also in the European Parliament. And what shall we do? People ask us, by the way, not only Hungarians, but Italians, Swedes, Dutch, the ever stronger the German friends who have to confront with ever stronger right parties. Should we keep silence? Should we abolish ourselves? Should we disappear? Should we give up the political power that is fighting for a social and strong Europe? Should we abolish the political communities that stand up for these in Hungary to make it a better country? And would the country be better if we give up our political ideas, if we adapt ourselves to the right-wing populism? I see for many this might be a path. You can do politics without principles. It might even be possible to be in power and successful for a certain period of time. But it's not worse, because this country, Hungary, deserves much more. Dear friends, I have another proposal. I think we should be even more confident. We should be even more determined, because there's no other force in Hungary that would stand up for a strong Europe and for a European Hungary in a strong Europe. So we must be more determined in standing up for that, and we must be much more louder, because in this right populist slogans in our world, we must have a strong voice to reach those who want indeed fair wages, pensions, health care, education, social care. We are the only ones who stand up for the taxation of the billionaires, and this country will only be a good country when it will be a just country and a more European country. And if we're able to become more determined and loud, then we should also be more confident. We do not need to be told by right parties or politicians whether we can be in politics or not. We do not need any allowance to stand up consequently for social democratic values. And we've been doing so for decades. And we're not asking the excuse of anyone for the fact that we still exist and fight in a country and for a country we believe in. This is why it's such a great pleasure to me that we have our European friends here. As Irache said in her video, sometimes you feel depressed when, after years of fight against right-wing populism, you don't fight against a politician or a person, but you fight against the whole approach, the whole idea. And believe me, it is It gives us strength to see you here. It gives us strength to see we're not on our own in this fight, that many understand why we fight for, and many see that we're not alone in Europe. Different to become a strong, just, democratic European country, Hungary needs us. Hungary needs you. Let's be proud of that. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. We'll continue in English. We'll have a panel now, and I would like to introduce you to our panelists. You've already met Gabi Bischoff, I think. Please come out here. And also already met Klára Dobrev. But we have Petra Bayer, who's member of Parliament of Austria and a spokesperson for the Foreign Affairs and Development Ministry. We have, and I'm sorry if I'm butchering your name, Liutauras Gudzinskas, who is a vice president of the Lithuanian Social Democratic Party and associate professor of comparative politics at the Vilnius University. We also have Tamás Székely, who is the president of the Federation of Chemical Workers of Hungary, and we'll have Zoltán Vajda, who is, from the back, who is a member of parliament and the chair of the budget committee from the Hungarian Socialist Party. All right, so we have around 40 minutes, and I don't believe that finishing a panel on time is considered traditionally left-wing or progressive value, but I'm a liberal man, so I will try to be strict, because I'm told that we'll have to finish on time. And what's better in the evening in very Mediterranean Budapest than talking about progressive ideas? I would like to ask you to try to answer briefly for the questions so that we can talk more, and there's a lot of the panelists here, so we'll have to take our time. Most of the panelists will speak in English. I will ask questions in English, but I give the chance to our Hungarian panelists to answer in Hungarian if they want to, because they have home field advantage. So my first question is that the last decade, since 2015, 2016, wasn't really considered a left-wing decade. So it was mostly from the migrant crisis and the election of Donald Trump in the United States, it was mostly considered the rise of the populist right in Europe and in the United States. But if we're talking about ideas, it's never too easy. It's never that easy. So there were some progressive and left-wing ideas that have been the stars of the last 10 years. I would like to ask each one of you to name one progressive idea that you think was the star of the last one decade. The catch is that you can only name one. And if I start to argue with you, that means that you are taking too long to answer.
European minimum wage.
Gabi Bischoff?
For a stronger democracy at work.
Stronger democracy. So we are aiming between actual European legislation to very abstract ideas. Let's see the next one.
I think the first step to have a due diligence in the supply chain was for me the most important thing, quite recent.
To continue, also SURE fund in the pandemic's situation to help unemployed people.
Let me say it in Hungarian because we had an excellent start by Klára Dobrev, and I think that her ideas should be continued. And there's no free Hungary without unions, there's no left without unions, and there's no union without left. As concerning the question, it's extremely difficult. I think if you think back of 2008 and before, the left governments in power had faced extreme challenges to keep their countries running. And unfortunately, they lost a lot in that fight because they could not fulfill the promises. They could not improve the social situation because they had to manage the economy. That was clear in 2008, 2009, and during the pandemic. And that's the cause, partly, of the emerging extreme right, because the sounds, the voices that strengthen the populist slogans are well taken up by those workers who lost their jobs, who lost their faith and cannot believe in the left. That's a mistake, and we had to correct this in the past, but the one thing is the collective agreement, minimum wage, and what's even more important than that is the collective agreement, to have collective agreements in the most possible places, and we will need much more efforts to demand from the nation states to adhere with the EU directives. There are certain governments, as it was mentioned a couple of times, also the names were mentioned. There are some governments that try to avoid these possibilities. No, we need sectoral agreements, and the sectoral agreements need to be respected.
Sitting on the extreme right of a panel that needs to discuss left-wing politics or policies, and it's difficult because many of my colleagues have already said issues which I would have thought about, and again, sitting on this side has this disadvantage of this as well. And I agree with what you had in your question, what you phrased in your question, that unfortunately the past decade hasn't been the era that we might be that proud of as left-wing politicians, neither partially in Europe, neither in the US, and I'm looking with dread at the elections coming up in the US in 12 days, 11 days or so. There's unfortunately a chance that an extreme right-wing populist, maybe even fascist president will come about in the US. Some of his remarks have been that. And I'm a politician in Hungary, I'm an opposition politician in Hungary. I'm facing a government that's right-wing, populist, and has rhetoric which is difficult. But I'll give you one answer which I think has been successful. The European response post-COVID has been, I think, partially successful, or in some degree successful, and I think we need to be fair. Some of the response of our government in this country post-COVID, with some of the microloans that were given to those enterprises that would have needed to close down during the COVID crisis, was, I think, a left-wing policy, and I think partially successful. So that's my answer.
All right, I was slightly anxious that nobody will take the easy hanging fruit of a more federalist reaction to any kind of crisis, because as I see it, it happened. The EU reacted in a more federalist, more collective way to several of the crises of the last few years. Do you agree with me, Gabi Bischoff? And do you see it as a way forward for progressive ideas, even though that we know that the leaders of the EU are mostly right-wing people, but they gave a more progressive approach to the crises?
I mean, the good message from the crisis, from COVID and all, was that instruments that we debated for 10 years, like SURE, and worked on it. I look also at my colleague here from the foundation, that Europe is able to do courageous steps if it's under pressure. It's not so easy if Europe is not under pressure to do courageous steps into the direction of a more federalist Europe. But I have been the rapporteur of the report on the future of Europe and future treaty changes. And we managed with 6 political families to come to compromises for a bigger step in direction of a stronger, more capable to act Europe, a more federalist Europe. But it's the member states that need some more courage to do these steps. But we will not give up as a parliament. We will continue to work on that, not only to do it as a means in itself, but what we can see in this challenging times that the European Union is not always capable to act, and there's especially one country that is often stopping in questions of unanimity, that Europe can take the right steps, and we have to make sure that we abolish unanimity, for example, in this sense, because we need to be more capable to act, and we need to do it fast.
So, which country were you referring to?
You have 3 guesses.
Well, one is more than enough, unfortunately.
So I will jump around a bit so that I can keep you on your toes with the answers. So, Liutauras.
Yes, exactly.
My question would be referring to what Gabi Bischoff said at the beginning of her answer. Never mind. We'll talk in English from now on. Yeah. Is that when Europe is pressured, it can move in ways that are considered progressive. Do you think that's true? And what kind of pressures do you see that can push Europe toward a more left-wing and progressive kind of machine or working?
Yeah, in addition to what has been mentioned, that for a decade we see more and more right-wing governments, we also can see that both in Europe but also around the globe we see democratic backsliding as such. So when we want to assess progressive ideas, its successes, etc., in general situation is rather gloomy. But I can cite one famous historian from Yale University, Timothy Snyder, who said that when we talk about democracy, and I can actually maybe to add progress or social democracy, we should understand it not as a noun, but as a verb. And we should understand it as a struggle. And a struggle which means that there are good guys or there are bad guys and you're always fighting. So European Union is fighting, what I can for sure say, and progressive forces in European Union are fighting. And actually quite literally, when we talk about the war, which the new phase started two years ago, Russia's invasion in Ukraine, the European Union provided and started to support Ukraine in quite substantially. I think Putin didn't expect so much support from Europe that it provided. But of course, fight is going on in this sphere as well as elsewhere, and we don't have to lose the hope, which is the leitmotif of this conference. I think hope is the real source of strength.
Right. You all have a chance, by the way, to respond to previous questions if you want to in your answers. But from Petr Bayer, I would like to refer back a bit to what I think it was also Gabi Bischoff who said that it would be good to leave the requirement of unanimity in foreign policy decisions. And I would like to ask you this because Austria in some ways moves a little differently than a lot of countries in Europe, because you're, for example, not a member of NATO. So it's you have a slightly different foreign policy from some of the countries. Do you think that it would be a good move to and a more like a progressive move to move away from unanimity in foreign policy decisions?
Oh, that is a very difficult question. Also within my party, not so easy to answer, to be honest. I think in some issues, yes, in some issues, no. I think that it's important not to be taken hostage from countries like Hungary in such cases. And I just can compare, I'm not active at the European Parliament, I'm active in the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, where we don't have unanimity, but we have not only Hungary, we also have Azerbaijan, and we also have Turkey, and some more hard nuts, I would say. And on the one hand, it's really it's a good question, the question of pressure. What really do you do that countries like Azerbaijan or Turkey behave in a way that complies with our values, that complies with our rules, simply. And of course, after the war started, we were, as Council of Europe, as Parliamentary Assembly of Council of Europe, we were totally quick in expelling Russia. Fine, totally fine with it. But in the very end, I'm a little bit afraid that we as a neutral state could stay with Liechtenstein and Switzerland as a rest, debate on a very high neutral level, but that's not the idea of multilateralism. That's not the idea, of course, how to bring our values forward. And when it comes to the particular role of Austria and our neutrality, I think we do not really make the best out of it. I think it's quite clear that at the European Union level, whenever it comes to support which goes in direction of weapons, we do not vote because we are not allowed. It doesn't comply with our neutrality to support any part in a war, any part in a war. But of course, we do not hinder any decisions, and of course, we are quite active when it comes to humanitarian aid and humanitarian support. And I myself think that first, my government. We just were sworn in yesterday, so we do not have a government at the moment. We have one, we have the old one, but we have not a new one. We started the first rounds this afternoon. But after the government we had so far, I think were very narrow and interpreting the neutrality. For instance, I would think there is no problem to clear fields when it comes to landmines. My government says yes after the war. I would say no, because the victims are mainly children and farmers and not the soldiers. So why not to clear, and we have a lot of knowledge in this case, why not to clear it now? Or even other examples where you could go better. And I really hope that we as a neutral state within the European Union, together with Malta and Ireland, we are not that many, we really have a particular role to play when it comes to negotiations, when it comes to provide space for talks, not only public talks, also silent talks. I'm not happy that we leave also at the international scene this role to Doha, to Turkey, when it comes to the grain deal or other things. I think that it's better handled in the heart of Europe.
So, Clara Dobrev.
May I have a comment?
Yeah, sure. We are on time yet, so.
If I may, there's two things which occurred to me from your response. One is it just caught my ear when you said that at the moment you don't have a government. I wish we were in the same situation. It just occurred to me, but on a more serious note, as a proud Hungarian, and I know that you meant it with all the best wishes, it caught my ear how unfortunately you say that we are not only facing Hungary, but you named two other countries, Turkey and Azerbaijan, and I'm sure that the list could have gone on. As a proud Hungarian, I wish that we would be coupled together with so fantastic European countries, which unfortunately we are not members of. And this brings me to the point of what this current government is doing. Under the disguise, they're calling it this economic neutrality idea. Viktor Orban, for the past several weeks, months now, has been talking about this idea of he wants to achieve economic neutrality in general. First of all, I don't think that's possible. As a fact, I don't think that's possible. We're part of NATO and we're part of the European Union. By definition, we're part of a bloc. The other reason is that I think under the disguise of this economic neutrality, which is a beautiful word, the word neutrality is something that's sexy. We all love to have that word. He wants the population, the electorate, to think of countries such as Austria or the country of, say, Switzerland, which are successful, neutral countries in many respects. However, I think that what he's doing is disguising it under this term of economic neutrality. It's a complete isolation of our country. I think from that viewpoint, North Korea is neutral. It's completely isolated. Or Belarus is neutral.
Not completely now.
Well, you're right. Or Belarus, or I could name awful countries, well, awful in that sense, which are isolated. So that's something that, as a proud Hungarian, worries me, that we are members of a wonderful bloc, both in terms of NATO and EU, and under the disguise of neutrality, we're being isolated.
Great, thank you. So, Clara Doblev. So the defense of Ukraine can be characterized in both right and left-wing ways. So the right-wing view of the defense of Ukraine would be the international rule of law and upholding the rule-based world order, while the left-wing characterization would be solidarity and acting in unison. What do you think that the defense of Ukraine is in some ways a progressive responsibility, or do we have a responsibility? Do you have a responsibility in that?
I don't see such a big difference between right-wing and left-wing support in this aggression or in the war. I see a support of Democrats and non-Democrats. I think this is the dividing line. In the European Parliament, we might have a lot of discussion and a lot of debates with our conservative, liberal, green friends, sometimes with GUE as well, but somehow we still stay in the democratic pave, so we have some democratic values in common. We do think that human rights, democracy, rule of law, these are important issues, and international law has to be respected, and to attack another sovereign country, it's not good. So I think this is the common understanding. What Orban is doing, it's outside of this understanding. It's not a right-wing or a left-wing politics. You can see some very left-wing politicians who are on the same side with Orban, and some right-wing. It's very funny in the European Parliament to see when there is there is a debate, then it's really a full circle. That sometimes when we vote on China, or we vote on Russian aggression, or we vote in favor of Ukraine, then you see really that far right and far left, sometimes they do match together. So that's why I think it's a question of democracy or non-democracy, autocracy or human rights, rule of law, rule of international law, or autocracy.
So Tomáš Székely, a bit connecting to what Zoltán Vajda said about the economic innovations of our Prime Minister, he recently announced a new kind of plan which I could recognize a few like almost social democratic ideas in what he said. Do you think that's true? Like higher minimum wages in...
Hát ha megnézzük az elmúlt 10
Well, if we look back for the past 10 to 12 years, then we see a number of programs of the current government that absolutely clearly expressed leftish values as well, but simply he turns it upside down. For example, concerning taxation system, he said that everyone should pay the same taxes. We know the outcome of it has been everyone pays 15% of taxes, income taxes, but it is much easier to create huge differences for people. At the same time, everywhere in Europe, family allowances of Orban, the system is largely discussed, but actually it is not a family allowance, it is an opportunity to deduct taxes. The higher income you have, the more tax deduction opportunity you will have. At the same time, Orban said that pensions should be in line with inflation. At the same time, we still have minimum pensions which are not increasing at all. So there are lots of things to talk about here, not to mention about minimum wages. For the past recent past, in nominal values, minimum wages increase, but that is mainly due to a favorable economic period. At the same time, already for several years, where Orban's propaganda that around 12% of the minimum wage increase should be introduced. But that is very welcome for many, but at the same time, if there is a 12% wage increase, then many might lose jobs, and once again this will be favorable for the richest. So it would be a very important task of the left wing to communicate the real content of this propaganda. Can I interfere and speak stricter? What Orban is doing has nothing to do with left politics. This is an absolutely neoconservative version of what the policy is introduced by Orban. He is an upside down Robin Hood, takes away all the money of the poor and gives it to the rich. So the family allowance system is just in the interest of oligarchs. So what the economic policy of Orban is very far from any social democratic values, and this is the reason that the country is about to collapse. Because and it will be very difficult for anyone in the future for a social democratic future possible politician in power would have enormous difficulties because the whole country is destroyed and totally devastated. So looking at a big picture, this is a fully kleptocratic, autocratic, and the most neoconservative party and politics and far-right economic policy.
Zoltán, but I will give you also because I didn't give you a direct question in this round, but I know that you have some ideas about the economic picture of Hungary.
Thank you. I'll try to expand to what Ms. Dobrev has already mentioned, this kleptocracy and things, but I'll give you one. Well, I'm the chair of the budget committee in the Hungarian parliament. Of the many failures of this government of the past 12, 13, well now 14 years, there's many which are close to my heart, which are awful failures, or maybe even sins that they have done. But one of the greatest sin, in my opinion, that they've done is wasting a decade of relatively strong economic growth in Europe, worldwide, and relatively strong economic growth in Hungary as well, without even considering the idea of the introduction of the euro. I'm not sure if the euro is a left-wing policy or not. I think we could debate that, but I'd like to put this here on the floor, that, to be honest, well, when they came into power, they at least had a deadline of when they would introduce it, then eventually that's gone. It's not that they haven't even done any steps. They don't even have a deadline. In fact, they've ruled out the introduction of the euro. And let's be fair, given my hope that a new government comes into power in a year and a half, in 2026, it will be a much more difficult path to introduce the euro in this more difficult economic situation. So in my opinion, the sins, or can I say, in some sense, traitors of what could have been a great path for Hungary, while many of our neighbors have either introduced the euro. We could look at Slovenia, we could look at Croatia, we could look at Slovakia, or Romania, which is very much on the path of introducing the euro. Hungary has lost this decade without having introduced the euro. That's my first point. And if I can have one more point very briefly, is the idea, which hasn't been mentioned yet here, but I'm sure it's in the head of all of us, at least Hungarians, is the idea that the EU funds are not coming to our beloved country. And I'm sure we could talk about these super milestones. I'm just an economist, I'm not a lawyer, so I don't really understand these super milestones. But in my opinion, these super milestones are just a complicated way of saying that the EU, in return for the taxpayers' money of Europeans, wants Hungary to achieve, or wants the Hungarian government, rather, to achieve three things. We should have democracy, we should have a functioning economy, and we should have a rule of law. I think these super milestones in a more complicated way, these are the three aims that should be done. To be honest, it isn't surprising to me that there are these preconditions now. It's shocking to me why there weren't so strong preconditions up to now, or at least why they were not taken that seriously. And I think this government is not that it's unable to accept these conditions, it is in the fundamental principle of this government that it cannot fulfill these, because it's the fundamental operation of this government that it cannot be democratic, it cannot work as a market economy, and it cannot have a rule of law. So these two things are in my head awful. And at the same point, we're turning to countries like China, we're turning to countries like Russia, to the European, to the UAE, UAE, and to Qatar for loans which have anything but market-oriented loans. In return, they want political subversion. I think that's the word here. So these are the two issues I wanted to raise.
All right. So let's get a little bit back to ideas. I would like to ask one more round of questions and with the answers from all of you. We started with what were the star progressive ideas of the last decade. I'm really interested in what do you see as the up and coming and the possible success stories in progressive ideas in the next 5 or 10 years, and also how much of a chance do you see in pushing them through this commission? And I'm just gonna push in a little idea about the housing commissioner, for example. Is that a really good thing about progressive ideas? Do you see a chance for that to happen? And I would like to move this way from Clara to the end.
I'll give it first to Gabi because I don't want to steal it.
Right.
So housing, let's talk about housing and then I'll get back.
The S&D group was the one that already the last 2-3 years was pushing very much for a European coordinated housing policy, because the housing crisis is the social question in almost all member states. It affects certain groups, especially young people. It affects people that, for example, single mothers, but it's now up to right into the middle class, even high-level earners that are not able to find affordable and decent housing. And that was the cause why we were pressing so much to have a commissioner, not to have someone to have a title, but to deliver a coordinated plan for affordable and social housing. And this affects a lot of political areas. And I'm working at the moment in our political group to draft up a mandate also for a special committee we will establish in the European Parliament, and that we focus indeed on affordable, decent and sustainable housing. And here we will look at legislation we have in the economic field. We have a lot of speculation. For us, housing is not a commodity like others. So we have to limit speculation. We have to go into bank credit rules. We have to go into state aid if we want to have more social housing. There we can have a huge effect if we change the current state aid rules regarding social housing to have more capacity on national level. We have other issues where we have to look how we can also we have the European Bauhaus initiative that we will link also with planning, with architects to see how we can do affordable housing in a shorter time period also. So a lot of challenges, but I would also like to refer, we had the Draghi report recently. Everyone in Europe at the moment likes to talk about competitiveness. And also in this report it is stated, we know that in Europe we need a lot of people to come to Europe with special skills to live here. We have young people that want to study somewhere and can't find affordable flats. So this housing crisis is also a big threat to the competitiveness of Europe. And this is why we will push in the next 2.5 years to really deliver here, to give more room and impetus for housing, and also to make sure that this right to have a flat, this basic right, will be really one that we not only talk about, but Europe can help to deliver, and we will increase the funds for housing. We want to double it in the cohesion funds. We have a lot of funds where we have little things where we fund, but we really have to boost it into one big instrument and come up and show that Europe can help to address crises that otherwise would not be possible.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would like to ask you to be brief, except for those people who haven't really spoken that much, and that means Petra and Liutarias.
Very briefly, I think there is a huge philosophical, ideological step forward, that Europe started to look on itself not only as an economic union, not only as a single market, but a union of over 450 million people. And that's what we saw in the last term, when we started to talk about wages, about income, about workplaces, and we have to talk about housing, we have to talk about pension, about healthcare, about education, we have to talk about people. So if you ask what is the biggest achievement for the next 5 years, to make even bigger step towards a union of 450 citizens who are not simply an economic players, but they are people, families. So that's our task.
I would prefer not to speak about content or a project. I would like to speak about a principle, and I catch up what I said at the very beginning, the due diligence in the supply chain. We as socialists and democrats, we know how the Europe we want looks like. And if we want a Europe that is fair and equal and free and lives in peace and is built on rule of law, etc., we all know that, then I think we must be aware that this is only possible if we have a world that looks the same. If we have a world that is fair, that is equal, that is built on rule of law, etc. And I think it's an old idea to as a leftist, to have the spirit of international solidarity, of one world that we share with 8 billion other people. It's easy said, but I think that we really have the possibility here in Europe to make the difference, really to turn the tide also elsewhere with our requirements, for instance, for this market, for products that enter this market. And I think it's not only a moral obligation to uphold human rights anywhere, it's really a necessity. Without that, we know that a world as we would like to have it is not possible. And so I think we never should forget the huge global umbrella we are working within.
Yeah, in Lithuania we are in the election campaign. On Sunday there will be a second round. Most likely Social Democrats will win. And that's also quite unique currently in this region, in Central Europe. After 8 years in opposition, we are again about to win. And with a progressive manifesto, we didn't do any concessions on any points. And one of selling points was actually housing policy. So we strongly emphasize on that, on social housing, on municipal housing, on control of rents, also student dormitories, etc. And it was very, very popular. And why it was popular, I think one of the aspects is that it's concern for young population, for youth. We usually tend to forget youth because of electoral maybe calculations, but I think we need to pay attention to their concerns, to their needs, and that's also one of the elements of fighting back.
Oh, you give them voting rights.
Oh yeah, also V60 also, we support that very much.
First of all, we have to reintroduce workers' rights as a result of the management of the economic crisis were cut. We have to agree with capital to be less hungry for profit and adhere to the goals that we formulated here. Due diligence, safe workplaces, the training and education of youth. This provides a vision to young people, and then we would not have young people leaving the country. And we also need an agreement with the unions. The European unions, the industry all is developing a strategy on that. We're in the midst of the discussions on that, and we hope that the European factions will receive the presentation of this new strategy.
I know that as a politician, if I'm given a microphone, I should be able to speak at great length about any issue, for example, housing policy as well. But as a politician, I also want to be popular. So I think the greatest way to achieve popularity in front of this audience is if I say that before dinner, I'm not going to go into great lengths on this. So that's how we're going to quit it here.
All right, thank you very much to everybody. We're out of time, so there will not be, I think, a question round, because I'm under intense pressure to, or do you want to, should we have a round of questions? How do you see it? One question, and you can ask it. Magyarul.
Sorry?
Köszönöm szépen. Ha megkérdezik tőlem, hogy
If I'm asked how I feel in my own country, I love so much, I say, not well. On the contrary, the past 14 years were terrible. And the question? Yes. Okay, the question. What is important to me, because I used to work as a kindergarten nurse. After 45 years, my pension is below the average. This is a terrible. You all go to market and know what things cost. Question. I would like to ask opposition parties, especially MSP, I will cry if they do not reach the threshold, and I'm a supporter of them. Education, health, and Clara has talked about it beautifully, and the gentleman too. So this should be priority. And if I may give you another idea, and the question, yes, that's the question. Private pension funds that the government misused 10 years. When do you want to get that back? When do you want to take back the pension fund sums that were taken away? Yeah, okay, when we were very strongly emphasizing that the government is proudly saying, in spite of the fact that there is a budgetary deficit and everything, all the indices are worse than 12 years ago, and that's indeed, it was better under Gyurcsány, if you allow me to say that. And all the figures were reached so that they stole 3,000 billions from the private funds. I'm not a populist that I would say that the next government will pay it back and this government will not repay it, but indeed we will have to continue with the convergence of the pension scheme, the pension indexing system, because it cannot be that pensioners are lagging behind from the very low wages in general, which means that the next government and the shadow government has a very strong, a lot of things to do, and this is indeed what we would have to deal with. And to be frank, I'm happier to be involved in that part of politics. Thank you.
Valaki még? I'm sorry.
Anyone else?
Panels, because it's mostly. Persze.
Tulajdonképpen az érdekelne, örülök, hogy
I'm very glad that indeed we have this meeting, but what do you do specifically to get rid of the Orban regime? That's my question. So please don't misunderstand me. it's not enough to blame him. We need specific measures. And what are these? Indeed. Thank you very much for this question. Let me answer that, but let me react to the previous question. That we indeed have tragic things in the country. Let's compare this with 2010. A very simple figure in Hungarian, 400,000 foreign per capita per year. This is from the newborn to the oldest person pay 400,000 forints per year as the interest rate for the state that, of course, we can say a very high percentage, the highest percentage of the GDP, but it's clearly understandable. Monthly, 3,000 forint per person, all the persons from the newborn today, which is more than what families get as a family, an allowance after 2 kids. All of us here, every Hungarian person pays 1,000 forints per day to repay or fund the state debt, much more than the government would spend on health or education.
Please give a round of applause to our panelists. I'm sorry that you could speak only so little, but this is a panel of 6 and we had 40 minutes. So I believe you'll have a networking dinner, and thank you for the panelists. You can all leave now, and I will like to ask Imre Komjati to say a few words while you are still here.
I think also
Kedves barátaim!
Dear friends, of course, make a speech before dinner is much more popular than being a leader of a left party in Hungary, and it's easier as well. May I welcome you again. We are so happy, dear colleagues, comrades from Europe, that you're here in Hungary. You see, you perceive that Europe is basically turning from crisis to another one. And the reason of the crisis are multinationals, banks, and the oligarchs and their greed for money, and perhaps the leader of a superpower being an aggressor. And people are hit by all these crises. The question is whether they are in silence or there is somebody who makes their voices stronger. I used to be a union leader in a factory, and as such I used to tell my people, if you don't have a voice, use mine. Now the question is whether the ones who do not have a voice can find one. Who will be their voice? Will it be us who want to have stronger unions? Will it be us who want to have less rich and less poor? Will be the ones who will be thrown away by the governments of the day, or will it be the right-wing populist voice stronger near Europe, represented by Orbán Viktor, the voice that is Putin's voice, the voice that is the voice of the Asian investors who say inside Hungarian factories in Hungary you have Korea and China. The voice of Orbán is malignant, and it cannot poison Europe any longer. Hungary is our mother country, Europe is our home, and we want a free Hungary and a strong Europe. I started with unions, let me finish off with them. We have the president of the Chemical Workers Union, Tamás Székely, here. What I learned here is that if you take separately your fingers, they can be broken. But if you bring your fingers together, and it is unresistible. So what I'm asking from my European comrades is to come together and have that fist and stand up with an immense power against the right populist in Europe. Thank you very much. I know these are not easy ideas, but enjoy the rest of the evening and the dinner. Follow me.